Californians, this is a must-listen and must-view show. Today, we're talking to two women who have done amazing things for the environment and water issues in our state. They've broken barriers and achieved tremendous results, and their work will undoubtedly have an effect on Californians for generations to come. I'm your host, Charlie Wilson, and this is What Matters, Water, TV, and Podcast. Thank you for being with us. Martha Guzman was appointed by President Biden as the first Latina to lead the Environmental Protection Agency for the Pacific Southwest. Martha is a longtime Central Valley advocate from Sacramento who began her career working for the United Farm Workers and California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. She has served as a commissioner on the California Public Utilities Commission. And while she's done many things to deliver access to clean, safe water for underserved communities, she told us that she is most proud of the work she's been able to do to help pass the California Driver's License Act for the undocumented, as well as making sure that electricity kept flowing to people despite the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. She is an experienced leader who values economic justice and strives to give voice to those who need it. Felicia Marcus jokes that she has an accidental career, but we can see from her accomplishments that they are serious and consequential. Originally an East Asian studies major with the intent of changing the international world, she fell into environmental and domestic policy instead. Early in her career, she learned about how sludge was still being dumped into Santa Monica Bay and decided to take action. This led her on a journey to become an advocate, attorney, and administrator championing conservation of California's natural resources. She even earned the moniker of California's water czar during the state's last severe drought as chair of the state's water board. Today, she's a fellow at Stanford's Water in the West program, a consultant and member of the Water Policy Group. So get ready to learn more about these two smart, powerful women, as well as their impact on California's future. We hope you enjoy it. Well, welcome, Martha Guzman. Thank you for being with us on What Matters, Water, TV, and Podcast. So let me kind of get right after it because, we're really privileged, and I do genuinely thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us. But I have to tell you, as we start, I have had my spies out, digging up and rolling around, and it's a really not a well-kept secret. But in California, you really are described as the MVP behind the administration's leadership in drinking water, in SGMA, Salton Sea, getting bond money, human right to water. For you, I have to start with, how did you move with your very eclectic background? You sort of came from a variety of different places. How did you go from this advocacy role into this public service? What you're doing now and with the Public Utility Commission. How did you make that transmission? And out of that, I got to ask, what is it that you're really most proud of?
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Well, there's so many things. How I made the big transition from being kind of in the, I would say, NGO space and then really getting into the political space, and always kind of did a lot of that, even while in the NGO times. As you know, I was with the union, United Farm Workers. That's like all unions, always very politically savvy and engaged, and see those two things really linked as they are. But it was basically when Jerry Brown got elected, I thought this would be somebody I'd like to work for. And so I did a very, very basic thing, which is I applied to work for him. And for a series of different events that occurred, I was lucky enough to end up in his office and had the honor of really working with a legislative team, and my portfolio was part of the natural resources and environment and agricultural space. So that was 6 years, and that was really all those years where you kind of mentioned some of those great and important legacies that still need a lot of work: drinking water, groundwater management, drought, another drought, worse drought. And but you know what? One of the things I'm most proud of during that time, and I'll share one at the PUC, is just some of the opportunities of being in the room at the right time and having a perspective, and in my case, a life experience of working with many immigrants. And it was being involved in the passage of the Driver's License Act for the undocumented. So as exciting as the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was, and reorganizing of the drinking water program, the human right to water, responsiveness to drought and wildfires, that was probably one of my proudest moments, being able to go talk to some of my soccer teammates and say, you're going to get a driver's license pretty soon. So, and similarly at the PUC, there's been so much progress on our California's portfolio of renewable energy, so much progress on many of our climate goals through our energy forum. And really, one of the biggest successes that we had was our COVID response and keeping people connected to their basic energy supplies. Making sure when we're coming back out of it, which I won't be there for as it's happening real time now, is that we're not leaving people in a worse place. And, so that was one of my proudest moments, is making sure that during our most difficult times as a society, as a world, people had power.
Well, you raise an interesting point, because you've been involved at so many different levels with so many different issues. Whether it's in the advocacy realm, whether it's public service, as a lobbyist and whatnot, do you ever get frustrated at the pace of change? When we're trying to get to resiliency, it's one thing, because we go through this all the time. We sort of have this, it's one thing to pronounce, hey, we're going to be, resilient. We're going to be 100% renewable energy. We're going to be X. And then the time and the decisions and all of the pieces then that have to follow to make it work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Does that frustrate you? Or, well, yeah, okay. And for every step forward, we get 2 or 3 back.
Yeah.
Do you ever get frustrated with the pace of change? I mean, and in your new role in particular, how do you see actually, putting that firm hand to the back and saying, how do I make a difference and make something happen?
It's going to be so corny, because I really am going to try not to cry here, but I, of course, get so frustrated, as many of us do, but there's nothing, I've had the privilege of working with many of the California tribes, and in this new role, I really look forward to working with the tribes across the West here, and the indigenous people in the islands. But some of the conversations I've had, particularly with tribal members, where they have been at this for centuries, and talking about exhaustion, and they still are moving forward, and there's been a tremendous amount of change in our nations here in California in particular. That's one. And I'll share, actually, I was just in Tijuana on Monday on a water and waste issue. As you're probably very familiar, many of our, the border was put across a place geographically, hydrologically, that made no sense.
Somebody just drew a line. So we're going to be here.
Yeah, some great genius, President Santana, president of Mexico at the time, I forget who was the US. Anyhow, you all know this hydrology there and the environment there overall. And it is, we visited these canyons where a lot of the trash and wastewater and everything is building up and then coming into San Diego. Same issue across the border, Nogales, Imperial with the New River. Not a new story. But we met with some of the community groups there, and they have a vision still. People have been working on these issues their entire lives. And so, to your question, I'm not going to be giving up if they're not giving up. They're working and they have hope, and I'm sure they have days that are really exhausting, but that's really what has, certainly in all these times. I mean, we talked a little bit about immigration. The immigration reform is a great example of some of the environmental needs that we have, that people have been working on, waters of the US or the Bay Delta or whatever you have that has been, so chronic in our policy world and our management of our systems. And we have to keep going. And that's the job and the privilege I certainly have in this role.
Well, I do have to say, just in my own familiarity with the California Public Utility Commission, I mean, you seem to specialize in these really impenetrable, in just horribly difficult, complex issues and try to find resolution. And I have to just say, a medal of honor for anybody that would serve at the PUC. What has to happen there? So clearly a reward from President Biden in making you the first Latina to serve as a regional administrator. What does that mean to you personally in being able to be the first in your new role?
Yeah, I just I kind of realized it after the fact, and it's an honor, of course, like many things that we do when we are underrepresented in government or underrepresented in industry, underrepresented in many sectors. There is a burden there to make sure we are representing, and it's certainly happening. It's an interesting dialogue. I think it's happening at a much larger scale right now with the Supreme Court. Governor Newsom just this week appointed the first Latina to the California Supreme Court. And we know that Biden is doing so, hopefully a first African-American Black woman to the US Supreme Court. I certainly hope so. And it really, for me, is about our life experience, particularly me as a Westerner, as a Californian, brings a perspective that is representative. I have grown up in this, I lived through floods here as a Sacramentan, where my family, my uncle and cousins, they were flooded over in the 86 flood. And I lived through many droughts, of course, and having that life experience, I'm just sharing that in our world, our environmental world, we can appreciate when somebody has dealt with that, somebody who's, worked on a farm, somebody who's has that life experience to bring to it. And being a Mexican woman brings value. And so we can, talk about whether that's the additional value that I bring as a mother, or the value as somebody who is obviously very well aware of the value of immigrants in our society, or the history of the West. And so, it's a great privilege that I have, and I hope to really give people not just young Mexican girls a vision, but also have people understand what California is and has looked like for many generations, and is finally being more widely represented.
So the policy question, then, I take all of that background, I take all that heritage, the service you have, the PUC on the electric side, you've done a lot of work within the water side. So I have to ask just sort of the policy blanket question: what does resiliency mean to you? And then how does that fit into the priorities now in Region 9 and what you bring to the equation? How do you see really addressing this? What is resiliency and how do you address it?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think there's kind of two lenses there. One, a lot of my work was obviously dealing with communities that were poor, a lot of rural communities, environmental justice communities that lack the capacity alone to really have sustainable drinking water systems, wastewater systems, basic needs. And certainly that reality is even true in the energy space. And that's really a hard question for us, because oftentimes as Americans, we have this pride and individualism, and really government is not that. Government is serving, the highways and building the roads and schools and things that have a common interest, the aqueducts. And we have to take that continuous approach to those communities that have the least. And we're really good about doing it to scale when it's like large populations. We're not so good about it when it's smaller scale. So that's one thing, when we look about sustainability, is how are we going to sustain, an ongoing operations? Where's the O&M? we have we have this horrible initiative that was passed in California, Prop 218, that really limits so many of our public institutions from the flexibility of getting to more sustainable approaches, because cross subsidization is real and it's necessary. It's how we've gotten many of our policies in the environment and social spaces as well. Just going back to this Tijuana situation, where we're spending millions of dollars annually in picking up the trash on the San Diego side, dealing with the wastewater on the San Diego side. And it would be much cheaper to put some money into the prevention. And so can we get there? We have all these, frameworks that we have to get through, legal and regulatory, but that's sustainable. Sustainable is dealing with what's the upstream cause of the problem? What is the long-term O&M? And certainly now with the overlay of climate, how are we going to do these systems so we're accounting for a reality in the water world? We're going to have way less water. And that doesn't just mean how are we saving enough water, how are we leaving enough water in the ground for those dry years that are ongoing. How are we structuring our rate systems? How are we structuring, all of the social architecture that goes around having less water right now, real time and in the future. So that's a real, and add the weather variability to it that's coming with climate. And certainly the actual infrastructure adaptation as well. So that's a lot. And of course, we have to run all of this with clean energy so that it can be more sustainable.
Well, I was going to say, because that was, your colleagues left behind, they're still wrestling. Okay, so how do I implement? What do I have to build? What's the pace of change? And it is can be often quite vexing. And so then you now take these responsibilities at Region 9 and really just kind of blow it up to not just California, which I always argue is, advantage, California is really big and really diverse. Disadvantage, we're really big and really diverse. And now you've sort of taken that with the EPA role and now the entirety of the West Coast. Mm-hmm. And, it was one thing to focus on just California, but now you've got to focus on a whole lot of other complexities as well. How do you go about, sorting through the priorities? Because there's only so much time in a day. How do you focus and what becomes your highest priorities then in trying to meet the regional need?
Well, that's a question I'm figuring out in real time. So I'm not going to. I
thought we were going to get some kind of a scoop, Martha. Jeez.
Unfortunately, the big at like anything, one thing I did learn from Jerry Brown was that, you as a public servant, you're going to respond to emergencies that you would have never forecasted. And of course, COVID is case in point to that. Now, some people could have forecasted that a little bit, but you know what I mean. There's realities, there's earthquakes, there's droughts, there's emergencies that are always going to take priority. And our responsibility is taking all of this knowledge that I personally gained from all of the people that have served in these great institutions, all the public servants, and using these moments to make sure we're coming out of it more sustainably. And that's really my goal, is to come out of it, not just more sustainably for the majority, but making sure that we don't do what we've done in the past and having certain communities bear the burden as a result. I have only recently been telling the story about how in that 86 flood I mentioned to you in Sacramento, they had to break a levee to probably more than one. I don't even know the full history, but it was an intentional break to save the greater part of the city. And they broke it in Strawberry Manor, which is a Vietnamese, Black, and predominantly Mexican community. We do make these calls, and the people who are making the calls, sometimes there are always sacrifices, of course, but my goal is to have the least and to have it not disproportionate. So that's a challenge, but it's really kind of the values that I bring to any situation. And I do really feel privileged to be able to be in the room when these decisions are made, to make them more equitably and to make sure we're coming out with these lessons learned, just as we did, I think we did during the drought, and trying to come out with greater groundwater management and drinking water management.
Martha, I could actually spend all afternoon with your background and with the issues exploring it. It's almost like I feel like we need to be doing some kind of a university seminar. We use you as part of that incubator. I can't tell you, I am so impressed with your background, with what you've achieved. We are blessed, I think, to have you in your role now at EPA with the background and the history out of California. Thank you so much for being with us. I would love to reserve the right to come back once you've now fully defined what Region 9 is going to have as priorities. Because as an NGO in Southern California, we certainly come with a particular viewpoint, but we work real hard, as you described, sort of how do we get a seat at the table and just articulate the need in Southern California and all of Southern California, not just certain interests. But how do we blend that into the larger state water policy? But as you then well know, water and energy, they're linked, right? Absolutely. If we're going to be resilient, if we're going to meet objectives on climate change, it's not a one-stop shop, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we very much appreciate it as part of why we do this show, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today. Martha Guzman, thank you.
Charlie. Thank you. Thanks for the dialogue. I really appreciate that you're doing it.
Great. Thank you again. Well, welcome, Felicia. Thank you for being with us on What Matters Water TV podcast. Nice to have you with us on our still brand new sort of introductory communication forum. How are you?
I'm great. And I'm definitely happy to be here.
Well, we've got very few minutes with you today because I know you in your new academic world, you're a very busy woman. But I wanted to start because we've never really had a chance to delve deeply with you with your really diverse. I mean, you really do have a diverse, storied career, and what you have brought to water. I have to start with you because I've heard you explain it in other places, but I just need you to articulate what brought you to water and water public service. Because I mean, this is not what people normally, as children say, one day I want to be.
That's such a good question. Well, I've definitely had an accidental career. It's not anything that I planned. I think, originally I was an East Asian studies major. I was going to sort of change the international world. And then I fell into environmental and domestic policy as something you could actually be likely to have an impact on. And it was interesting. And frankly, my entry drug to water, though I had worked on a bunch of other issues, was sewage. And it was, just being the junior fellow at the Center for Law and the Public Interest and having someone walk in and telling me the story of the city LA's inadequate treatment of their sewage and their sludge still being dumped into Santa Monica Bay. And I went to a hearing to just check it out because I never just took a case without making sure that the plaintiffs were going to be strategic and make a difference versus just yelling at the other side. And, lo and behold, that day I ended up giving Dorothy Green's testimony at the Regional Water Board. And it began sort of a decade-long effort on sewage in Santa Monica Bay. And eventually it led to the creation of Heal the Bay, which I was a volunteer for before going to public work. So essentially sewage was my entry drug into the water world. And then, of course, going to EPA, Bay Delta arose, and each another layer came up. But I think the only full-time job I've had purely on water was the State Water Board.
Well, because there's nothing sexier than sewage, I got to tell you. I mean, that's, obviously that'd get me up and get going in the morning.
It's totally interesting and fascinating. It's great. And the people who deal with that river of human waste coming at them 24 hours a day with the resources we give them are quite noble. It's fascinating.
Well, I get it as a surfer. Right? If I see certain floaters and things coming by, okay, you got my attention now. It's a serious subject matter. So let me then build on that, because again, you sort of talked about it. You sort of fell into this by accident. But over the course of that career, you have advocated, you've litigated, you now educating, you've organized community groups, and you've sat at that regulatory body in public service. At all those different levels, is there one role or one place that you have found to be most important, or where you think you had the most impact?
Well, it's sort of probably two different things. I think each one has been completely different and a real privilege. I think overall for me, the fact that I've been put in other people's shoes multiple times in my career, being forced to put myself where my mouth was in a way that should make me keep my mouth shut, I think, is a very humbling experience. And it's just given me this rare glimpse of what it feels to be a regulator, what it feels to be regulated, which is something that every advocate should experience at some point, and every regulator should experience. So you start to have empathy for the different people around the issues. It's hard not to see, going from being the lawyer representing Heal the Bay to running the public works department in LA as the ultimate humbling growth experience. And a lot of people helped me there, both in the environmental world and within the city and with the consulting community. Mayor Bradley and others gave me the car keys in a way that I never would have thought possible. And so I probably grew up 40 years in those 4 years, because operations is where the rubber meets the road. And until you're actually in it, you don't realize how hard it is and how noble the people are who are just trying to make do with the resources they have. So that was sort of my formative coming of age job. So it's hard to not always start there, but EPA was a remarkable experience of working on a breadth of issues, and in particular, getting to bring people together on multi-state and international agreements, not just being able to work on things like the Bay Delta Accord. I worked across the West, and in a way that was very empowering on air and water and waste. So that was amazing, and particularly the work with Indian tribes will be the high point of my life, was being able to help empower tribes and build capacity there and respectful relationships. But then the state board was pretty awesome too, in terms of really being able to move the board into a more active role in being a partner in many ways, but also using innovative and strategic regulation across a wide range of issues, whether it was Bay Delta or safe drinking water, or groundwater management, or regulating ag pollution, or you name it. It again, as an equally broad kind of a job. So each one had its moments that for me, each one of which I'm just incredibly grateful to have had. And each one had its humbling moments where I learned a lot. So that's sort of the nature of life, is to look for those moments where you can contribute something, but where you can learn a lot.
Well, everything you just described in all of those situations, and I've asked this of virtually everybody I've talked to, whether legislators, regulators, or NGOs, these are big, hairy, complicated issues. And it's one thing for a public policymaker to make the declaration, we're going to be 100% reliable, 100% resilient, we're going to be 100% whatever. But what you described is the people that actually have to make that work happen. And do you ever get frustrated at the lack of progress? Or did you feel like when in each of those roles, were you able to make a significant contribution about moving the ball, about getting something built or getting something done?
Well, to me, that's the whole point of it. I mean, someone told me I had the heart of a construction worker. And I just want to build stuff and make things happen. And so it's, again, I'm sort of also more the social worker in all of this. So in all of those jobs, I've been really fortunate to be able to accomplish things that I'm really, really proud of, just as there are frustrating moments of either things I didn't get to or things I would have done differently, or obstacles that I certainly couldn't overcome. But you've heard me talk about either the challenge of ecosystem management or the issue of my karma running over my dogma. There's what I found in each of these jobs, that taking the time to talk to people, whether it's really listening to them in a public hearing, which is something I really spend a lot of time working on and really value. And I've learned a lot from actually approaching each person as an individual speaker who has something to offer and something I need to figure out how to listen to, whether they say it in a certain form or not. Or those coffees and drinks and just hallway conversations to really understand what do people really need? What are they really afraid of? And then construct something different from the talking points that either their lawyer told them to say or that they feel like they want to say. There's something that is incredibly, sorry about that.
See, there they are. They're coming for you again.
I know, it's like, this is urban living. That's the thing. I'm in infill development. I found that those one-on-one conversations where you can really talk offline, away from the cameras and away from the microphone, have helped me figure out a path that's different from what the institution may have thought it wanted to do in their sort of language, or what a combatant on whatever side of an issue wanted, to come up with a third way or a different way of solving the problem. And you end up in a situation where everybody doesn't get what they were asking for, but more people make progress versus sort of talking past each other and bemoaning how stupid everybody else is, which, as you know, is something I just see all around us in the public policy discourse in a way that breaks my heart.
Well, did you ever want to just jump down off the dais one day, like the State Water Board, with those lines of people out the back door, all giving those same comments? Like, no, really, what do you need me to do?
Yeah, no, sometimes. Well, it's you know, you got to spend time thinking about, like, why do they feel the need either to be rude or mean, or which I can understand, because there's pain and fear on all sides on a lot of these issues, and people don't have faith that people in government are going to listen. So sometimes they don't even try to approach it in a way that would make a human listen. I just finished a paper, and actually just was working on a PowerPoint with colleagues, where one of the points is, you know, regulators are people, utilities are people, enviros are people, you know, you've got tribes, you've got EJ communities. And if you see the people and sit down and just talk with them about what it is they're worried about and what they want, you can usually come up with something. And it's unfortunate. I think the hearings I ran a good 2 hours longer than if somebody else was running the meeting. But I really believe in the civics I learned in 4th grade about government being an organization of us as a social construct. And so I think it's worth listening to everybody. Where I get frustrated, as you may recall, is where people are just giving their rote 3 to 5 minute talking points to perform for the cameras, or to say they did it. And they're not actually trying to convince us of anything. They're not putting themselves in the decision maker's shoes. I mean, you've got to, as an advocate, as a lawyer, it's really helpful if you can get the decision maker, or a judge, or an administrative person to want to do what you want them to do. And then they can they'll help find a way to do it. I learned that early on as a lawyer, and I was successful as a lawyer and an advocate because it was so rare that people did that.
Well, I have to say, my favorite hearing of yours, and I know you didn't plan it this way.
Oh, no.
But was the day you were doing something on Bay Delta, and it happened to also be the day that the building was doing a blood drive. And so anybody that came into the room to give testimony literally had to go through the blood donor line. I thought, what a perfect segue. You will give before you get your chance to speak.
I know, we should have moved people up in priority if they could.
If you have your sticker, you're on.
Yeah, right. I didn't think of that. That would have been a good idea.
Well, out of all of that, I had the chance to sort of watch how you interacted. And I have to say, in all of the settings, you come at things with an incredible amount of optimism. I mean, it is so hard for people to be critical and say, it just doesn't work. And come on. But you approach this with such optimism. I got to ask, what is it that gets you up in the morning that gives you that positive, optimistic outlook? And what do you have left on your agenda? Now that you're at the big university, what do you have left on your agenda?
Oh my God, those are two completely different questions. I mean, I think some people are just born glass half full and glass half empty. And, you know, without getting too psychological, you know, I had an early childhood, without getting into it, where everybody around me got sick and died. And so to me, if I wake up in the morning and I can walk and talk and breathe, that's a good day. So I start from a different place where every day I wake up with gratitude for my life. And I have most of my life. I mean, I have my bad days, but I know what really bad days look like. I think sometimes that's an advantage over people who've had too normal, I suppose, of a childhood. So but as an adult, I just think it's a more practical way to live. I think people disempower themselves by letting anger control them and not having empathy for other people. And as you heard me say, I mean, I've been humbled enough by, well, it's not like I don't get mad, right? You've seen me get mad at times and I've lost my cool, but more often than not, I found that if your reaction to somebody isn't always what they were intending to say. And if you ask a question, at least half the time, they didn't say what you thought they said. Maybe they used different words, maybe their emotion colored it, whatever. And if you ask a question, you find out that they really have a legitimate interest. And I find people incredibly interesting. And so I kind of like figuring that out. And so it makes it sort of every interaction is an opportunity to see if you can help somebody, sometimes despite themselves, I'll be sure. But I think most people go through life interacting with their idea of what somebody else has said or what they think the person's going to say, and they don't even really listen to them. So they're not really interacting with those other people. They're actually interacting with themselves, like in a bubble. I can almost see those bubbles around me, and I don't want to be that way. I want to try and be as connected as I can. And these jobs have given me, but also when I was in the NGO community, a real opportunity to try that in all kinds of venues with all kinds of people from different walks of life. And having been in those different places, I know there's not one way to be or one way to communicate. And I think that's an advantage in being calmer. But my expectations are lower for people than others, not to be a cynic, but I'm looking for what's pleasing or what, so somebody loves them. So why, that kind of thing.
Well, it's too big a softball then for, instead of asking you about, your greatest failure and what you learned from it, there's got to be somebody that just horribly offended you at some point. Anybody that you actually turned and now become really good friends with?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Stories I can't really tell because the story, well, maybe in a bar.
But we need the scoop here. Come on, Felicia.
Yeah.
We got to have what matters scoop on, so-and-so did what.
No, definitely. I mean, there's always, we all have different chemistry. And when I was at the Board of Public Works, I would trade 2 for 1. If there was an advocate that was in my assigned sphere of influence or responsibility that I just really rubbed me the wrong way, I would trade with my commissioners. I'd say, if you take so-and-so on that issue, I'll take 2 of yours that you can't stand. Because that was always a good deal for me because my tolerance is so much higher and I like people. So give me 2 for 1. But if I know I'm just not connecting with somebody or it's going to trouble me, I'll trade. I mean, there were times when I took myself out of issues because someone clearly had an issue with me. I've been people you all would know. And I just found somebody else in the institution to deal with them because they always obviously had an issue with me. And years later, when I talked to them, I'd say, well, what was that? And we've gotten over it. I tend to, over time, I'll sit down and say, let's have a cup of coffee and let's go over it again and see where the perceptions were wrong. But at the moment, nobody's a saint. Certainly not me. I can hit a nerve.
Let me bring you back to water for a minute because we talk about resiliency. It's sort of became the catchphrase just after, Mr. Newsom took office. And I know that with your appointment and what you did with Governor Brown and the State Water Board. But what for you is resiliency? What does that mean? And how do you see us achieving that in California? Is that possible to really get at true resiliency?
Well, the short answer is yes, but it takes us getting over ourselves, which is the big challenge, of course. It's interesting because I actually going to be talking about this Saturday morning. There's a big difference between sustainability, which has been I won't even say a buzzword, but it's been a movement for the last couple of decades, and resilience. I prefer resilience to resiliency. I'm not sure why, but and the difference is resilience is a whole nother thing because it, in the practical sense, it shakes our world. If you think about climate change and resilience, in that we're going to have swings that are beyond the norm we've seen during the years we established our planning measures and all of that. And there's no way we can build ourselves out to meet what's going to end up being the 100-year flood, as opposed to what the 100-year flood is now, to take an example. I saw something yesterday that said, we're going to see a 100-year flood every 10 years, maybe, or more. So we're not going to be able to do that. And that brings in the other notion of resilience, which is the ability to recover from hard stuff and disasters. And that's a different mindset, that we know we're not going to be able to make it 100% sure. So we're going to have to look at different tools that give us the flexibility to rebuild or to fix things with less expense. And to me, where I'm optimistic about that, and I think we can make it in theory, maybe not in practice, as Yogi Berra would say, is that more nature-based solutions, more multi-benefit solutions, more working across the traditional silos of profession and organization and excellence and moving faster, it takes a whole different human dynamic and actually some tools and data that we don't have readily at our fingertips. So there's a certain amount where more of the floodplain setbacks that are going to give us groundwater recharge and dissipate flood flows, so that you end up with ecological value and flood control in the same effort. And that's happening all over the world and in places in California. The upper headwaters work that billions are going into from the federal government, but also from the state government, if we do it right, where we'll be restoring not just healthy forests and reducing those catastrophic wildfires outside the norm that are causing enormous carbon emissions, but also just wreaking havoc with water and sediment and contamination. But we've got to do it while integrating meadow restoration and other things, not just taking out trees willy-nilly by measuring the size. So that's an integration of disciplines that people are working on, but that our existing system doesn't reward. So much of the policy and political dialogue is based on a combat model, people arguing at the extremes and somehow hoping the decision makers gonna come take their side entirely in a convenient way, when in fact we've got to look more holistically. And so can we do it? Yeah. Will we be able to adapt to do that? I don't know. I wouldn't bet my house on it, but I optimistically would wager that we're going to be able to do more of it in more places. And things like the success of Measure W in LA County, where you're going to get $300 million a year to do multi-benefit projects that have urban greening, flood control, water supply, and water quality benefits. If we can implement that effectively, will be a perfect, even national example of adaptation for resilience. And if you add to that the major recycling projects, both City of LA and the Metropolitan LA County Sand projects, those three projects I'm pretty much in love with and have been writing about and hoping they will get implemented. It's a decadal effort, but I'm already seeing people working across traditional divides, even just within the city and across Met, taking on this role, greater reliability role. So I'm seeing progress again, but I'm a glass half full person. So we have to figure out how to nurture and reward those things and make sure they actually cross the finish line. But they're everywhere, particularly in the nature-based
I noticed
solutions.
there in your answer, you said, if we can get government to do certain things, and we sort of, people kind of have structured their lives and their institutions around sort of what works for them. And I guess that's kind of where I wanted to head with this was, these are all government, investments. These are things that need to happen through government institutions. And I think part of the frustration is, how do they move quickly enough? And every time we have something that is that big, that it seems to be more difficult, somebody somewhere finds a way to jam a broomstick in the spokes and say, hey, not on my watch. No, you're not, it's not enough for me. And as you described, it's that old battle armor. It's like, it's my way or the highway. And it's, it's a kind of like a war of attrition, but yet you still think we have the ability. It's one thing to put $300 million toward, but if we can't get the money spent on projects that make people's lives better, that's where people get frustrated with government. Then they just start throwing the bums all out.
Well, no, I think that's true. And that's why I think one has to be intentional about it and work with people. I mean, one comment on what you said, where I'd add a piece, which it's not just the person trying to stop a project, it's the way people propose the projects. Because people propose them, we're right, we're not going to study what you want us to study. We're just we're right and you're somehow evil or mean, rather than coming together and figuring out how to help explain it. I mean, I've gotten projects through in public works with much shorter documents and with people saying, thank you, but we changed our project based on good suggestions, as opposed to trying to come up with every reason why they were wrong, which is what people do tend to do. They feel righteous in their cause, and everybody feels righteous on all sides, but you're not going to get there and get that social license without engaging with the various interests and coming up with something not that pleases everyone, but that people can see, even if it's not what they would propose, is more fair. And then you isolate the talking class on either side. And I can think of, numerous examples of that. So I think we all have to engage in figuring that out. But I completely agree with you on the implementation side. When I was at Public Works, one of the things I saw and was concerned about was that we had passed a number of bond measures for police stations, fire stations, the wastewater program, libraries. And so we had billions of, literally, we probably had over $6 billion in bonds to spend. And I panicked and I thought, oh my God, if we don't get this money spent and spent well, not just throwing it out the door, then it'll become, the public will exactly feel the way you did. So, went to the mayor and I said, here's an issue. And we created a bond acceleration task force that I was the chair of. And it was beautiful because I asked our staff in public works, who were trying to get projects through the other agencies, right? Building and safety and everyone else who had to sign off. And I said, why don't you think about where we could streamline this and find a way to track it? And in the very first meeting we had, I hadn't told them to do this. I was very proud of them. They came to this meeting at our long conference table and they had a stack of paper. And the guy who was doing the presentation did this. And he said, here's the list of all the permits that are needed. And literally he had accordion taped the pages together and it went all the way down the table and everybody looked. And he said, everybody in this room is a part of why that list is so long. And that's holding up outside projects and our projects. Let's figure out how to make it go faster. And we met, I think it was every week. And it became very easy over time to play spot the jerk, which is something I do like to do in multiple meetings to move things, where everybody in the room can see where the holdup is. And the person who's the holdup realizes they're the holdup. I'm oversimplifying, and I'm not going to name which department it always was in that case. And, we sped it up and you didn't see massive headlines about that because we got them moving. But I saw that fairly early on as something difficult, but that took a lot of time that nobody ever sees. And I think if you had more people in government who were thinking about those high value, low glamour, keep your eye on the ball things and thinking a few years out to what will happen if you don't spend it well, either if you spend it too fast and you spend it poorly, which is the scandals you tend to see in the news most often, or if you haven't gotten it done, which you also see, you have to spend as much time on that as you do on the idea of the thing. And I kind of like that. I'm more of that journeyman. I like doing that behind the scenes, high value, low glamour stuff. It doesn't make headlines, but it's very satisfying.
Well, those are tremendous lessons, I think, that we can all learn, and the kinds of things that that the Southern California Water Coalition, we try to bring to the table when we do our education and trying to, if you just put a bright light on it and say, well, let's call it what it is, and then how do we move this thing forward and not get entrenched in some of those, warrior-like atmosphere. I think that works really well. Felicia, I got to say thank you. I know 20 minutes flies.
Oh my goodness,
we're together. It's like we could just literally sit and do seminars with you as part of Stanford's Water in the West. I just got to say, you are a pure joy to be with. You've done some of the most controversial water policy in this state's history, both at the local and at the state level. We learn something from you every time we are with you, and I appreciate that about you. And please keep your 2x4 handy, because if I ever become one of those, nudges that you described, I'm not helping move the ball along. You have license, take that 2x4 and just smack me upside the head and say, Charlie, knock it off. Let's move the other direction.
Well, Charlie, I'm never going to need to, because I really appreciate your help and your practical understanding of the people side of this, and that it's important to talk to people one-on-one and figure out what the issues are and then solve them. And I think, we've all had our wins and our losses and things we would do differently, but yeah, I'm really proud of some of the things, many of which, nobody will ever really know about except some small circle of people over the years, including across the West and internationally. So to me, that's really it's a great life. It's been a great privilege to have this life voyage. And it's really nice to be at Stanford, where I can take a little bit of time to reflect and help people, across the West who are in different places. And the nature-based solution space is really fun, and the recycled water space is really fun. And someday I'll come back to water rights and Bay Delta, but I'm taking a little bit of time away for a while. It's been fun. It's been fun to get back to my operational roots. So I'm having a great time.
Great. Well, Felicia, thank you so much for being with us on What Matters.
Thanks a lot.
Well, thanks for joining us on What Matters Water, TV, and Podcast. If you like today's discussion, go to wherever you download your podcasts and give us a 5-star rating. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to our channel. That will help us build our presence in this new world and on this new format. If you're interested in helping sponsor the program, please reach out to us at socalwater.org and send us a message. And as we close out today's show, I leave you with this challenge. Be a part of the conversation. Be a part of the solution. At the Southern California Water Coalition, we educate to advocate. So as public policy leaders have difficult choices, together we help them make informed decisions. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again next time on What Matters Water, TV, and Podcast.